10. He would not miss it. The weather was terrible that day. The steady rain, temperatures were in the 40s. He still got out in that weather. Because of the bad weather, he didn't quite make it on time. He was running a little bit behind. It was difficult to get to his seat, but he persevered. His seat was not comfortable. He neither left nor did he complain. His presence vividly demonstrated his love and commitment. He was a joyous person the entire time. He enjoyed the presence of fellow believers. His attitude, his attendance, and his enthusiasm all reflected his deep, abiding commitment. He was at a college football game on Saturday afternoon. And by the way, he didn't attend church the next day because there was a 40% chance of rain. Things were not looking too good for that day. And I think, sadly, that becomes a commentary for many of the people who call themselves believers in Jesus. We, for whatever reason, at times find our worship with fellow believers in the local church family to be less important than other events that fill our lives. We can find so many different things. Now, prior to our going to Disney World, we had worked our schedule because worship is that important to where we could be here last Sunday morning with you and worship and preach and be in fellowship and then leave in the afternoon. And things worked out where we didn't have services and flights got canceled and all that stuff. But we're back today. And in reality, I could have took the day off and said, you know what, I'm exhausted. I've driven 10 and a half hours and I need another day to recoup. But it wouldn't have been the same. And we have to stop and ask ourselves, what is important in life? I think as followers of Jesus, we find our times of worship with fellow believers in the local church family less important than the things that we choose that we want to have in our life. It comes down, as we mentioned the last time we were together, as a list of priorities. Now, you may say, well, hold on, preacher, I'm here every chance I get. I had the flu last week, or I'm under the weather this week, or whatever. Or maybe we'd say something like, well, how often does State and Carolina play? The game's coming on, or the Panthers are starting at 12 today versus, and race season's coming up in February, coming through Florida. All you can see is advertisements and banners for the Daytona 500. Don't miss it. And I'm so glad I missed it because the traffic between Orlando and Daytona is terrible. We've been there during that week when we were traveling down to visit family. I've been there during the July week when they have a race in that area. You know, don't get me wrong. I get what you're dealing with. I feel the same way at times. I love to be able to do things for my family and spend time away with just them and get away from the business of life as usual. Don't you? But I rarely miss an opportunity to be with God's people. Now, it may not be with New Testament Christian Church and the fellowship of believers here because I'm away, but we often find an opportunity. We make plans to be in worship wherever we find ourselves. And I think if we're honest, a lot of times we don't always go there. Be turning your Bibles to Acts chapter 2. I think the first thing we need to understand is we need to be willing to make worship a priority and worship with other people a priority in our life. Because true worship, well, it flows from the heart, doesn't it? It's often been said, whatever you put your heart into, you'll put your all into. What are you putting your all into? I think as we consider this true worship flowing from the heart, it's a reaction to how magnificent God really is. It's our understanding of responding to the gospel message of grace that God allows us to gain entrance into His kingdom, though we don't deserve it. And we experience God during this time. And I hope today you're experiencing God. That's what it's all about. You see, true biblical worship is also manifesting itself in our experience with the believers that we're around. It's too easy to become isolated in a little capsule or bubble, even when we come into a larger group of people, that we fail to realize that we are placed here for a reason. No one lives life completely isolated and alone. The people that you encounter in life that find themselves living completely alone are some of the most miserable individuals that you will find. Why? Because they're alone. God never intended it. And so true biblical worship manifests itself in our experience with other believers. Now, the proper term is corporate worship. That's what it's deemed as, corporate worship. Well, to put it in more common terms, we call it going to church. Where are you going? What are you going to do today? Instead of saying, I'm going to corporate worship, or some will say, I'm going to the fellowship of assemblies, we say, I'm going to church. Well, let me give you an example of what going to church really should look like. In Acts chapter 2, verses 46 and 47, it reads this way. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. Now that's true worship, isn't it? That's true worship. Look at some of the things that took place. They continued to meet together. Other translations would maybe say things like they devoted themselves. Devoted themselves. My wife and I devoted ourselves to one another. We're committed. We're all into this thing. We've talked about that before. We know what it's like to have this devotion. This is not just a gathering today of to check off some spiritual, legalistic checklist that we may have. Say, well, I went to church today. I can say I went this month. It's something that we need to make a priority in our life. Now, the word devoted means a motive of passion, of heart, or desire. Wow. Is that why you're here today? It says they had glad and sincere hearts, quite simply because their focus was on God. They didn't dwell on personal preferences. Well, if it's the style of music, or if the message was longer than normal, or if maybe someone's sitting where I normally would sit, and I'm not comfortable sitting in this spot because I've got that cushion in the bottom of this place just honed out just right for my little tush. I've sat there so long, I know exactly how it feels when I get there. You know what it's like to go off and sleep in a strange bed. Sometimes the one lays better than the one you have, and other times you're like, I can't wait to get home and get back in my own bed. You just know when you get in your bed and you turn a certain way, you're like, oh, there's that spot. Now, I'm going to tell you something about myself that Amy noticed about me, and I never knew. Of course, I don't look at myself while I'm sleeping. But Amy says, you always do that one night. That was the phrase I heard. You always do that. I'm like, always do what? She said, when you lay your head on the pillow, I can always tell when you get ready to go to sleep because you go. In other words, I'm getting my pillow just right and my head just right where I'm comfortable, just the way I want to be. And she says, I know when I'm talking to you, if you go, if I'm not finished, to tell you, don't go to sleep, or I just need to be quiet and let you go to sleep. And so sometimes I would notice after that, when she would say that, she would say, don't go to sleep. I'm like, what am I? I'm not going to sleep. She said, yeah, but you went on your pillow. There's something about being where you belong, isn't it? And that's what church is all about. That's what worship is all about. That's what these people were experiencing. The Bible says they had glad and sincere hearts, quite simply because their focus is on God, and they're not dwelling on their personal preferences. They're focused on Him. It says they also enjoyed the favor of all the people. Now, in particular, this is speaking not so much about those who are gathering in the house with them as fellow believers. It's talking about people outside of the church. That's the reason it would say in verse 47 in chapter 2, and the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved, because they were enjoying the favor of all the people because of the way that they worship God. And to have that kind of worship requires your full devotion. It means that you're going to be giving everything of who you are to God. And you're going to place fellowship and worship to God above everything else in your life. This evening, what are you planning to do? Now, we were in Florida. The forecast through next Sunday, when we were looking at it yesterday morning, said, here's the extended forecast for the next 7 days in Florida. 79 and 80 every day, and I think the lows are supposed to get down to about 59. I told Amy, I said, it's amazing. We got to Florida, even here, it was cold. We got there, and we had to deal with the Florida winter. There was people saying, I survived the Florida winter. And I'm like, the Florida winter? It was in the 50s in the morning, in the daytime, and it got down in the 30s at nighttime. And one lady said, I thought I was going to have to turn my heat on. And I'm like, what? She's like, they're walking around, they're cold. And we're like, what are they so cold for? People are bundled up in heavy jackets and stuff. And it was only the Floridians that were there at Disney World that were bundled all up like that, because people from up north, they were walking around, maybe had a light jacket on or walking around in shorts, T-shirts, and things like that. And people said, it's so cold. Aren't you cold? I'm like, well, we left, it was 9 degrees last Sunday morning. 9 degrees? I would freeze to death at night. I said, I think tonight or Monday it's supposed to be like 4 in the morning. I don't know what time, if it ever got to that temperature, but it was supposed to be cold. And the lady said, I almost had to turn my heat on. I'm like, man, not only we had to deal with winter at home, we had to go to Florida and deal with their winter, both days of it. But we need to understand that when we come to worship, it's something we just have to be devoted to. Secondly, we have to move from half-hearted participation to joyous contentment. No matter what goes on, no matter how it's presented, if we're giving it to God, it should be a joyous event. We had to be committed to Christ. The truth is, many of our church services around the world have to beg people to attend the worship services. Why? Because we've moved from coming to worship to being served. That's what happens. So many people we run into today, as has been called, I've got some inexcusable conflicts that are taking place. The football game popped up, or kids soccer, traveling baseball, softball, weekends at the campsite, lake, beach. You can go on and on and on. Maybe hear this one from time to time. I didn't get much sleep last night. I only got about 4 or 5 hours of sleep. I was just too tired. Here's what Rainer says in his book. For many Christians, all other activities have become mandatory, while worship services have become an optional afterthought. If nothing else, preacher, if nothing else comes up, count me in. You got me. I'm all in. But they've already told me what? If nothing else happens, nothing else comes up. Now, see, when I would tell you, count me in, Jimmy, I'm all in. You don't have to worry about me. I'm going to be there. I'm part of that. You don't have to worry about it. Unless something comes up. You know what I'm talking about coming up? My lunch. You know? There's been a death in the family, in the church family, something like that. It's not going to be, well, something else come up on the schedule. Look, if I've committed to you, you're on my schedule. You get it? You're on my schedule. That means nothing else can get in that spot unless it's a major emergency. But what do we typically do? If nothing else don't happen, preacher, I'll be there. I'm going to be in church Sunday. I'm going to be at the fellowship this evening. I'm going to bring a pot of chili. What happened? Well, the Panthers didn't quite finish playing this evening, or I was watching the playoffs, or and they should have been done. Well, guess what? You've already got a commitment. You know, nothing else comes up. I think if we're honest, there's more truth in the statement that Rainer said about it becoming an optional afterthought than we would even like to admit. Jesus met a Samaritan woman at the well. You remember her story? Maybe you're familiar with her. Jesus knew it all too well. He begins to tell her that she's been married to 5 men, and the man she's living with is not her husband. And as a result of that, the Bible uses this word about it. She says she was amazed at the things that he knew about her. But do you remember the last thing that Jesus said to her? In John chapter 4, verses 23 and 24, he says, but an hour is coming, and now is, when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For such people, the Father seeks. He seeks to be his worshipers. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and truth. Don't just show up. Don't just find a spot to sit down. Worship. That's what he desires. It goes from this half-hearted participation to this joyous commitment that we should have. If there was ever a declaration of our commitment to worship Jesus, he's just said it. That's what he desires. God's own desire is for us to come and worship him. He loves nothing more than for you and I to come into this place ready to meet him together. I think that's the problem A lot of time we come in to meet God by ourselves, and we're going to leave here by ourselves. But we should come in with an expectation to meet him together. The early church met in each other's homes. You remember that passage from Acts chapter 2? Paul even reiterates that in Philemon 2 when he says the church that meets in your home. So Philemon was a person who allowed people to come into his home and worship God. Corporate worship is not just an option that many people have. It is something that must take place. It has to be consistent, and we have to be persistent and practicing it as believers if we're going to be true believers of Christ. People say, well, I can worship God sitting on the lake with a fishing pole in my hand. I'm out there in creation. Look, I feel close to God when I'm out there, but I can't be close to God's people. I can be out in God's creation. I can look at a beach. I went to Florida. I saw some beautiful trees. I saw some beautiful landscape. I saw the great sun. I saw the warmth of it warming my soul. I got that. But if I'm not with God's people, I can't truly be in corporate worship because I don't get the fullness of all of who God is. What about you? Where do you find yourself? I think that what we're trying to encourage each member to do in 2017 is to just give over everything that gets in the way of what causes us not to be able to worship God, and to have this joyous commitment to Christ in worshiping together. And here it is. We need to be able to avoid the trap that's been called the shift to preference-driven church. Remember Rick Warren, he had the purpose-driven church. Everybody needs a purpose. I need to be a purpose why I need to be in church. My purpose is to be a part of the church. My purpose is to be involved in fellowship. My purpose and my purpose, my purpose. And there's nothing wrong with being a purpose-driven church, but most of it focuses on me and my purpose and not so much about who God is and what we're trying to achieve. And now we've gone to the preference-driven church. I'm sure some of you have heard of it, if not experienced it yourself. The preference-driven church is just there. Somewhere in the 20th century, believers, particularly in America, began to shift from the attitude of self-sacrificing service to God and worshiping God to consumer-focused, self-focused attitudes. And the blame comes from in other places. Number one could be the secularization of our culture, Secondly, the degradation of our theology, what we really believe of God in our own churches. I mean, theology, that's what it is, what we believe about God. And so we degrade what we believe about God, our theology. Thirdly, we could be blamed on the local church leaders who have taken a corporate model and turned our churches into consumer-focused organizations. So maybe it would go something like this. If all three are playing a role, we don't allow God in the schools on any level. And if we do, we're not allowed to share the gospel in love with anyone who has a different opinion of who God is than what we have. We also want you to come and be comfortable. We want you to feel safe and warm. And is the temperature okay for you? Are you too hot? Are you too cold? Is the music too loud? Is it too soft? Is it your kind of song you like? Is it not? Is the preacher's preaching okay? If not, we'll talk to him about it. And if that don't work, we'll find another preacher. We just want you comfortable. Are you happy? We want everything to go smoothly. Let's don't rock the boat. And so we do all we have, and we do everything we can to make this service all about you. And we hope that we do it well enough that hopefully we don't lose you to the competition down the street. We see another church as competition. Am I ringing any truth to what I'm saying? When we should be people who are winning people to Christ. That's what the church should be about. So we think corporate worship is really all about us because we've told you it's all about you, me in particular, when I come here today. So we say things like, well, the music's not what I'm used to hearing, or it's not my favorite song, or my favorite style, or I'm not comfortable with the worship service, a little bit too hot, a little bit too cool, or seats not very comfortable. Maybe why don't we go to chairs instead of these pews? I want my own personal space, and a chair allows me to have my personal space versus a pew. I've got to make sure I've got this area buffer zone between me and the person next to me. I don't like that. I don't like the ministers preaching. That's my favorite one. And not. That's a joke. You can all laugh at that one. But let's be clear. You should come in each Lord's Day and expect to have God's word preached in an unadulterated way. Well, if it hurts your feelings, makes you mad, if I come in here and tell you everything you want to hear, only the way you want to hear it, and you feel good about it every time, then most likely God's going to rebuke me for it at the end of the day, because I've not addressed sin in your life. And I haven't addressed it in mine. Sound familiar? And so we have to be careful. It's not about my personal preferences and the church being driven toward that. It is about making sure people understand who Jesus is. And so instead, as members of New Testament Christian Church in 2017, let's just say this, that I will be involved in corporate worship. I'm going to be in the worship services. I'm not going to, unless something keeps me away that are beyond anybody's control, circumstances, and it has nothing to do with my alarm not going off. And the reason it didn't go off is because I intentionally didn't set it last night. You ever use that one? I'm sorry, I planned to be, my alarm didn't go off. I knew I was going to be out late. I purposely set my alarm, but I purposely didn't turn it on too. Now I've got an excuse. No, I'm going to be deliberate. Let's put the focus where it belongs. It belongs on God. And serving a risen Savior in the person of Jesus Christ, uniting with people we love and who dearly love us and want to have that relationship with us. And we draw strength from one another in corporate worship. And so together our focus is in the right place. And we begin to see a dramatic change in not only our church body, but our community around us, because what we really want to have is as they said in Acts chapter 2, we had the favor of all people. We want people to come into the church and the church family so that they have a relationship with Christ. That's what it's all about. And to do that, they had to say, corporate worship is important to joy. And joy, where are you going to do today? Do you want to go do something? I can't. I'm going to go worship. Won't you go with me? And then afterwards, we'll catch some lunch and we'll run down and do what you want to do. Why? Because it's that important. And when it's that important to be with God's people, what happens? And they say, wow, this is a significant thing. It obviously is very important. So here's some ways we can do that. Just a few steps. First of all, just tell yourself, I'm going to attend worship services. If there's a worship service, I'm planning on being there. I'm going to make it a priority every week to be there. It's going to be a major issue. I've got to schedule for work or whatever, but if I'm not there, I'm going to be in worship services. It's just that simple. It's amazing how we do some things when we want them to be priority, don't we? We wanted to go to Disney World. We had to plan to go. We had to be there. We had to be on a certain time schedule. We had to know where we were going to be. They didn't let me skip certain things. They said, you got to do this because we've already booked it. And, you got to be there. It's part of your life cycle this week. Worship service should be part of your life cycle. So make a firm commitment to God to be here and to worship. We love you. We want you to be a part of it. When you have to be away, find a place to worship when you're gone. Give God an hour and a half of your vacation. You saying I should be away from everything? You forgot, preacher, I'm on vacation. I shouldn't even have to go to church if I don't want to go to church. Then are you generally worshiping God? Secondly, say I'm going to pray before I attend worship services. I want to pray about this thing. I don't want to come in here with the wrong attitude. I want my attitude to be one of worship. Pray God speaks to you in the service and He motivates your heart, and pray for others who will be in attendance also that they're going to have the spirit of worship, and pray for your family as they come with you that they're going to have a desire to worship with you as well. This great holy God that we're talking about. And then pray when you enter this building. Wherever you worship, pray. The sanctuary is God's place. This is a time where Satan wants to show up. He's going to try to distract you. You're going to get a text message or a phone call, or you're going to, somebody's going to say something, or you're going to look down and see you got two different color shoes on. I'm just throwing that out there. Don't get distracted. So pray for a spirit of worship. not only for yourself, but also for others. Pray that God removes the distractions, whatever they are. But the thing about it's going to be there tomorrow, isn't it? Leave it for tomorrow. Give God today. We also need to pray that we will be worshipers and not judges. Now, this is a tough one for us, isn't it? Gracious, you're probably looking and thinking, man, the service went a little bit long. The preacher didn't get started till 12:15. Look, I'm watching the clock. I got you. You're already late. You ain't making lunch if you had it at 12. And it ain't my fault. Here's what Rayner says as we conclude this. He says, too many times we leave a corporate worship service as if we just judged an Olympic event. We might give the pastor a 7 for the sermon or less, or a worship leader a 6 for the music, or other worshipers a 3 because we felt like they didn't participate as well as they should have for one reason or another. And when we leave with that judgmental perception, we haven't really worshiped God. What we've done is we came expecting our own expectations to be met, and we leave as our own object of worship versus God receiving all worship and glory. So pray for a focus on Him in this coming year. Let's just start what's been known as a worship revolution in New Testament Christian Church. We stated a couple of weeks ago, because we weren't here last week, that it's both sad and amazing reality that many of our congregations across America now, as we shared the statistics, consider an active church member someone who attends twice a month, 2 services or less a month. Even one is in the service, the congregation I served before here. If you attended one service, period, throughout the month, didn't matter what service it was, you were considered an active member. And as I said before, if I only showed up once a month around the house to see my wife, I don't think I'm going to be an active husband. I may not be a husband at all. So why do we consider ourselves being active members of a body of believers when we go that way ourselves? So make a commitment that you're going to be fully devoted to worshiping God this year. This is the time for you and I, as members of New Testament Christian Church, just to take that moment and gather with people who should have the same priorities. And our lives should be all about God. Nobody else. Nothing else. But we've all got other things going on. Don't get me wrong. I've got to go check on my mother. My grandfather's house burnt down Thursday evening. My mother's aunt's living in the house, and she probably laid a cigarette down or something. The sofa catches on fire, and the house burns down. There's not much of a house, but it was all they had left of my grandfather. I mean, what do I do? It's a distraction at best, but it can't stop me from worshiping God. We've all got things going on in our life, sicknesses and school and gracious, you name it, but it can't stop us from our focus of who God really is. Oh, my friends, I will make the commitment to worship weekly with you, not because I'm the preaching minister and you say, well, you ought to be here, you're the preacher. No, because I desire to come before a holy God who I can fall at His feet anytime I want to and say, God, I'm here not because of who I am. You don't desire anything out of me. You didn't come to worship me. You desire me to come here and bow down in front of you because of who you are. And anything outside of that is going to distract the worship from God back on me. So what about you this year? What about you this morning? You've had a lot of things going on. You've had a memorial service. You've got your children all over different parts of the state going to school and different things going on. And different ones have different things happening in your life. And it's so easy to be distracted that we miss worship. And when we miss worship, we miss Jesus. And you're saying, well, that's me today. I've missed Him. I've allowed something else in there that I have been distracted by, and now I have missed him. And I want him so bad. And so today, I want to challenge you as we get ready to sing this closing song. I'm just going to sing Just As I Am. Do you want Jesus? Do you want to commit to worshiping? Do you want to say, God, this year I'm going to commit to being fully devoted to corporate worship. I'm going to be where the body of believers are. When your New Testament church person or your family meet, I'm going to do everything I can to be a part of it. Everything else becomes secondary. I'm here. I'm all in.